Hello, friends. I'm Jeffrey Rosen, President and CEO of the National Constitution Center, and welcome to We the People, a weekly show of constitutional debate. The National Constitution Center is a nonpartisan nonprofit chartered by Congress to increase awareness and understanding of the Constitution among the American people. In this episode of We the People, I am delighted to share a great dinner conversation about the American idea with Charles Cook of the National Review, Melody Barnes of the University of Virginia, and Sean Wilentz of Princeton University. We discuss the core principles of the American idea, liberty, equality, democracy, and federalism, and explore the ways they've been contested and embraced throughout American history. Enjoy the conversation. Let's begin our conversation in a spirit of openness and learning, a willingness to listen to perspectives we may disagree with, the possibility of changing our minds, but always a commitment to opening our minds, which requires learning and deliberation and growth. It's especially meaningful to talk with this group of special friends about the American idea, because the American idea is under siege. On the left and the right, extremists are questioning the basic ideals of the Declaration and the Constitution, embodied in ideals like liberty, equality, democracy, federalism, separation of powers, the rule of law. And there are some who wonder if the American experiment will succeed. And indeed, we meet in a fraught time for our politics and our culture, and no one should underestimate the seriousness of the challenges that we face. But the National Constitution Center is built on a radical premise, namely a premise of faith in the American idea, and a faith that with deliberation and discussion and a commitment to the shared framework for discussion that the Constitution creates, the vital center of America will continue to embrace the basic principles of liberty, equality, and democracy, and will ensure the survival of our republic. It is, in any event, an experiment, as our founders reminded us, and the experiment includes a commitment to the conversations we're about to have. There's no better way to start this conversation than with three of the greatest scholars and thinkers of the American idea. Please join me in welcoming Charles Cook from the National Review, Melody Barnes from UVA, and Sean Wilentz of Princeton. It is really meaningful to talk about the three ideals of the Declaration, and I said that we would begin with liberty, equality, and democracy with these three scholars. As it happens, they have written about them definitively from a historical perspective and have invited us to look at the way that our understandings of liberty, equality, and democracy have changed over time, and will help us set the terms of the debate. So we'll just jump right in with the world expert on the age of Jackson, Sean's award-winning book on the evolution of democracy in the Jacksonian era. We'll start with democracy and ask Sean, what was democracy for Thomas Jefferson, and how did it evolve between Jefferson and Lincoln in a way that makes you say that Jefferson and Lincoln were the two greatest avatars of democracy in the 19th century?
Wow, you have read my book.
Well, I read the preface anyway.
I try to put it all in there, though.
Yes, right. Absolutely.
Well, first of all, you used a phrase in introducing us that is really important, which is the vital center. And that was, I think, the thing that it's a phrase of Arthur Schlesinger Jr.'s, and it referred to in the 1940s, the politics in the 1940s, the distinction between those who were in the middle, fighting like mad, a vital center, not a dead center, but that there was something outside that we had to prevent from taking over. Then it was fascism and communism. That was what he was talking about. And I think that within the American, with democracy, any of the things we're talking about, that vital center is crucial. That vital center is crucial. When it broke down, the one time it's broken down until now, we had a civil war. There was no vital center then. But with regard to democracy, or actually all of the things you mentioned, I like to think of this from the beginning as something that's contested. That we didn't have any one thing. Jefferson was perfectly fine. He did write the Declaration. Very, very good. But, you know, there were lots of people who had a very different idea of what all of the Declaration was about. And I think that American history, if you want to understand American history, you have to understand it from the very beginning as a history of conflict rather than consensus. We are a very disagreeable people. We disagree with each other about lots of different things. What holds us together, however, is this idea of the vital center. That we will not take up arms against the government, for example. The one time they did, that's what happened. But within that, there's a constant evolution. The evolution doesn't just happen magically, mystically, abstractly. It happens because people disagree. And sometimes one idea moves further out. We've seen swings in American history around democracy in particular. But that's because of conflict. That's because of struggle. And I think that that's something we have to establish at the start in understanding any of these things.
Crucial insight right up front that the goal is not consensus, but productive conflict. The Constitution structures that conflict in ways so that it's made for people who fundamentally disagree, as Justice Holmes said, but always united about the meaning of those ideals themselves, which provide the touchstone for the vital center to structure their productive conflict.
That's right.
Melody Barnes, in the inspiring mission statement of the Carr Center, you talk about Jefferson's commitment to democracy and the Carr Center's commitment to democracy. Tell us how you define democracy and how you think it's evolved over time.
Well, first of all, it's wonderful to be here. And when I think about democracy, I want to pick up on something that Sean was talking about. There's the big idea, the big 18th century idea of self-government. And what's interesting, and I think ties directly to what you were just saying, Sean, is the contestation and the expansion that took place over the next 150 plus years till we get to this late 20th century idea. In fact, the bigger idea, I think, of self-government as a multi-ethnic, multiracial democracy. And that is actually a relatively new idea. I will tag myself. I turned 60 in April. And when I was born, those ideas legislatively were just beginning to take hold. 64 Act, 65 Act, built on the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. The ideas that you were talking about, equality, liberty, freedom, we've talked about separation of powers, all of those are fundamental ideas that allow for democratic institutions and democratic practices to allow us to shape this idea of self-government, allow us to move forward productively, allow us to protect the rights of the minority, allow us to move forward with the goals that have been established by the majority, allow for the expanding participation of all people. And at the same time, if we don't focus on how those values and how those ideas are actually shaping democratic culture, those institutions and those practices that allow for self-government are on paper. They are not real. And I think that is one of the big questions and challenges for us today. What does our democratic culture look like, and just how healthy is it based on those values that you've articulated?
Such a crucial reminder of the evolution of democracy to embrace those previously left out. As you said, it became increasingly multi-ethnic and multiracial. You have written about how for Jefferson it was democracy for poor white men, and it took the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement to extend it to previously excluded groups, and still always the struggle to ensure that the institutions live up to those ideals is ongoing, crucial. Charlie Cook, there's so many angles that you could take this from, and you've written so powerfully about immigrants and democracy. I'm also interested as a conservative. You've written about the debate between are we a republic or a democracy? It was a debate that Hamilton and Jefferson famously had. The Constitution makers, as the historian Hofstadter famously said, feared democracy. The whole Constitution is set up to avoid mobs and direct expressions of populist will. Are we a republic or a democracy, and how has that understanding evolved over time?
Well, we're both. And finding the balance can be difficult. What I think is one of the most important questions at the moment is at what point are the conflicts, the contestations that were described, resolved? I mean, there's two ways, really, of dealing with that sort of conflict, and goodness knows we have a lot of it in America at the moment. One way of dealing with it is you nationalize every question and you see who can get more votes, and the people who lose, lose. And they're pushed along by the law. And another way of dealing with it is you fracture power. You fracture democracy into different groups. And I think we've stopped taking advantage of that part of the American system in the way that we should have. And I think one of the reasons everyone is so angry with one another is because of that. Now, this is to your point about democracy and republicanism. There is a balance there. There are certain things that should not be locally decided. Civil rights is one of them. The Bill of Rights is another. But most of the questions that we argue about can be, without really impinging on the American ideal, transportation policy, education, health, taxes, and so on. And I think that the map for American renewal does not actually lie in who wins the next presidential election, much as both sides keep telling us is the only election that will matter, the most important election we've ever had, potentially the end of the country and what you will. I think that the restoration of America lies in a return to a system in which we agree more readily to live and let live. And I think we have that already within our constitutional order. So I agree 100% that the soul of the American system is conflict, the contestation of ideas, ambition, free speech, differences. But I think the best way you deal with that in a country that really is profoundly divided, as America is to lower the stakes of your national politics. And this is the thing that alarms me the most. This is the last point I'll make here. This is the thing that alarms me the most at the moment, is the number of people, and I have friends who are Democrats and friends who are Republicans, who really do seem to believe that if the other team wins next time around, that's it. And we should be taking advantage of the fact that Massachusetts and Florida are both really good places to live, depending on your political view, and they can be good places to live without really affecting each other. They're both good models. Which one is better is a matter of taste. So I think, to me, that's an important function of our system that's been ignored, and one reason why we're so cross with one another about everything.
So thank you for centrally putting on the table a value not from the Declaration, but the Constitution, and that is federalism. And as you note, the initial constitutional debate between Hamilton and Jefferson was national power versus states' rights. Not only republicanism, which is limited franchise and ruled by elites, against democracy, which is ruled by the people, but Jefferson wants, as you said, democracy at the lowest possible level, local democracy. And the historian Herbert Crowley argued that all subsequent debates in our constitutional history have rehearsed that Hamilton-Jefferson battle over states' rights versus national power. Mm-hmm. And Sean, in the 19th century, of course, it was the central division over how to end slavery, was whether or not the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional to expand federal power after Reconstruction, and then our debates about the Progressive Era, the New Deal, and the backlash of the Reagan era with the new federalism. So federalism as a value, I just gave a rough historical evolution. How would you describe the evolution of the debate over federalism throughout American history? You can do it, and we've got 35 minutes.
Back to my oral exam again.
Absolutely.
Yes, Professor.
Extra credit.
I'll do what I can.
Yeah.
We should move from abstractions to the concrete. I mean, the point about federalism in the decades before the American Civil War, states' rights and so forth, it became attached to a very specific thing. That wasn't the case when the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, for example, were passed in 1798. That was, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison trying very, very hard to keep the Federalists from running amok with their Alien and Sedition Acts and so forth. And so they were calling for, actually, they were almost nullifiers. They came pretty close. But that was the issue was not an abstraction. The abstraction continues, but the issues change. And so by the time you get to the 1830s, When you have real nullification,